Hello, everybody. Sorry about that small technical difficulty. Welcome to Game Masters Under Dark, where we get together and discuss your questions and give some tips for running tabletop RPGs. We know it's been a while, so I think maybe some reintroductions might be necessary. I'm Will, one of your game masters and the newest out of the usual trio that we have, but tonight I'm joined by Matt R., who is always here with me.
Yeah. The fabulous. I'm sorry, you said reintroductions, and that's how I want to be introduced now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Eccentric, the fabulous. Forgot what that one word was, and everybody had a whole thing about it. Remember that? Histrionic? Histrionic? The guy that forgets the word histrionic often? That's me. That R.
Yes. So, again, for those of you who might be new, we do normally have a third member, Matt H., who is not here. This is not our full-time jobs, as you guys can tell between our upload schedules. So, work, for me, school, and I have a child. So, life. But all that being said, we are here to finish up the 3-part series that we started, it seems like forever ago, looking at ability scores and how they're used. To finish up, we're actually looking at intelligence and wisdom. So if you want to take a look at what we've done, I'm going to put a card in the upper, I think it's this corner. Nope, that corner. I always get confused. It works weird. Things are backwards. But we're gonna look at intelligence and wisdom.
This is gonna be a heavy episode, dude.
Yeah, this one's pretty important. We saved, in my opinion, the best for last. Well, no, I'm the charisma guy, but really the best for last, because intelligence and wisdom are two of the most commonly used skills.
You will if you ever played D&D and you've ever played with a new person, it's always been like, hold on, what's the difference?
Yeah, exactly. So let's start there. So before I have a character sheet pulled up. So before we get into the, I will say, technical aspects of what intelligence and wisdom are, the easiest way to remember it, especially as a new DM, is intelligence is book smarts, wisdom is street smarts.
Well, I got a thing too. Another way to remember it.
Okay, go for it. Yeah.
All right. I didn't want to get ahead of us and be like, let's backtrack. So I got this cool chart.
For those of you just listening, he's pointing to a chart behind him.
Sorry, for those that are listening, I got 4 pieces of paper on some cardboard, and it's where all my D&D quick notes are. Everything's there. Anyway, so on it, I have wisdom equals awareness, senses. And then example, Tarzan. That's a good one. Think about it. Intelligence is deductive investigation and interpretation. Example, Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, no, I get that one. I'm still not up on the Tarzan. I would have went.
It's Tarzan, bro. Tarzan is smart.
I would have went.
But he doesn't know how to read. Right?
Okay.
That's why he needs that Jane.
Yes, they are. I want to see Tulok make that video. Tarzan and Jane.
Jane is a soft spot in my heart because I also don't read well.
Oh Lord.
I need to learn.
Well, I think. Oh God, I'm gonna ignore it. We're gonna. So I think what we'll do is just looking at the character sheet. We're gonna start with intelligence first. So the way that Wizards of the Coast has defined intelligence is intelligence measures mental acuity, accuracy of recall, and the ability to reason. So the checks that are intelligence checks, specifically these are the skill checks portions of this, are arcana, history, investigation, nature, and religion. The biggest of those is investigation.
Every day.
Yeah.
I use that all the time.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think and we'll get into perception here in a little bit, but I'm real big on doing the passives just to kind of keep things moving. I know that's not necessarily the way they're meant to be done, but you know what? I'll hold off on getting too much into investigation because we're going to have to talk about that in perception because that's one that I think even myself mess up a lot. But
Perception is like a 4 thing, isn't it? 3.4, fourth edition? 3.5?
perception?
Yeah. It's not on the table anymore, is it?
Yes, it is. It's a wisdom check.
Oh, it is wisdom.
See, and this is why we do it because even we forget, guys.
I was like, wait, I always use insight, and that's because perception. Anyways, we'll get there.
Gotcha. So we'll get there. So, Arcana is, Arcana measures your ability to recall lore about spells, magic, basically anything magical. History is, think just back to school. Anything history related that's non-magical.
Villages, names of those. That's always a big one for me.
Wars, legendary heroes. Things like if a good example would be
9/11.
I was gonna go with the Arthurian legend of the Holy Grail, but
That's also history. Good.
Yeah. Sorry, I was not ready for that.
Who's ready for 9/11? Nobody, dude.
We're not doing this. Nope. I'm not doing it. I'm gonna move on. I'm not.
Let's. Things to do, Will.
Yes. Well, especially because I like I said, in the investigation, perception, insight. That's a big thing. The next thing though that is intelligence based is nature. So it measures your ability to recall lore about terrain, plants, animals, weather, nature cycles. Basically, like you're a walking almanac. I might be dating myself there. I don't know if anybody uses that anymore. Yeah. Moving on. The actual skill check is also religion. Again, same thing applies. It's the ability to recall lore about deities, rites, prayers, religious hierarchies. You get it. So I think the big thing here that I can say is the key term is lore, which is typically things that are written down. Typically. So that's why I say intelligence is
like the one of those that kind of slips into rules a little bit, into like mechanics, because you can play with spells that have already been pre-written.
Right.
And like the components that make up them too.
Right, but that could also be something like if you're a wizard, especially because you have a spell book, that would be written down. So that's just a good example of that. So other than investigation, all of these are things that you typically could like go to a library, read, and like, oh, okay, I now know about whatever it is you read. Some other things for intelligence checks. Some of these are especially important in newer modules if you're playing pre-written campaigns, like this first bullet point here. Communicate with a creature without using words. So Wild Beyond the Witchlight, which we've started in our like little personal game. We haven't quite gotten too deep into it.
Oh, carnival part, which is cool.
I love that part. But a lot of that campaign was written to be non-combat oriented. Is like the writers even came out and said that like you can fight, but a lot of the encounters are purposefully with monsters and creatures high above what would be a normal safe combat encounter, because they want you to use more passive methods like talking and things like that. So
like imagine if Alice from Alice in Wonderland just decided, you know what, I'm gonna take on the queen.
Yeah, not
in the original story, not in the Tim Burton one, because she did.
I don't know. I haven't seen that one. I'm a sucker for the original. But
a little girl fighting a big old caterpillar, even.
Yeah.
Probably caterpillar's gonna win. So talking, these skills will come in handy.
Yeah. Some other things, intelligence wise, pull together a disguise to pass as a city guard. That would be, I think, something if you don't have like disguise self or disguise kit. Yeah, this would be like, oh, I know what they look like in this city, and we just need to
Right.
find everything.
That's a good point too, because when it comes to those things like with disguise or lock picking and that kind of stuff, sometimes players think I can't do it because I don't have that. Whereas if you can pass the skill check in certain times, you can do it. You just didn't have the kit or the power, like the superpower, to do it. You can still do it. You can like make a fake mustache and still disguise yourself by using one of these things.
Yeah, you definitely can, and I think that's where, as a DM, obviously you have to look at like whatever the DC is. So, like if you don't have a thieves kit where you can lockpick, that it is obviously much harder to pick a lock. But in that case, I might say if you're in like an urban area, I might make you do an investigation check, and it's like, let's see if you can find something to do this with.
Right? Or even like a history check. And then I would say, I do this a lot. Is if they don't have like, if they can't really pick a lock, maybe do a history check, then make them come up with a reason of why they know how to open this door, and it's not your typical lock. And then you would be like, "Oh, what the hell?" As a player, you'd be like, "What does that mean?" And then you would come up with a cool, new, intricate way of how to open up doors.
Yeah, that's to point that out. That's something much more up Matt's alley. That's not something I would necessarily do. Full disclosure, I would kind of be like,
It's a Kenku door. Only Kenkus can open it. You have to use find a Kenku feather. And you'd be like, "Oh,
like
go find a Kenku feather."
like a fingerprint reader.
Yeah, exactly.
No, and that's I mean, yeah, everybody runs that a little differently. That's one of the reasons why I like playing in Matt's games is he kind of lets you very much bend the rules. Where I don't want to say rigid, because I'm kind of like, no, that seems like it would work. That's fine, but I'm also not as imaginative as Matt. So,
if anything, you are learning to find that
imagination, just
imaginativeness.
I don't know if that's right, but
Your imaginativeness is not full throttle yet. It's just leaking. You are. It's there though.
okay.
You can turn it up. You can open that faucet, Will.
We'll that's what we're working on. I don't know. I was stuttering there. So again, I'm gonna bypass investigation real quick because that's gonna be a part of a much bigger conversation. But let's look at wisdom checks. So again, these are the skill checks that you use like your proficiency plus your bonuses, from each stat. So I have animal handling, which is like keep a mount from getting spooked, calming down a domesticated animal. This one is a little different. I've not used this, but intuit an animal's intentions. So maybe if you're like, ooh, I know that dog is aggressive just because of, how it's
More
growling.
So
or
than it's growling. More so
Yeah.
than it's growling.
Like maybe the way it's
nervous. That's a bigger thing.
Yeah, there you go. Insight, again, I'm going to skip on and lump that in with perception and investigation because, again, those are used quite a bit. A medicine check. So if you have proficiency in the medicine kit and you have one on you, you can actually use that roll to stabilize them. So if they're at 0, instead of having to make death saves, if you can get to them, you pass the DC, you can stabilize them. That's something that I think was in the DMG, but I know for sure is in Xanathar's. So I love using those rules, as you guys, as people who have watched us for a little while know. I love Xanathar's Guide to Everything, so that's why I know that so much. But yeah, it can be really helpful, and if you can stabilize somebody, especially say after combat, you might, you don't have to use necessarily a potion or things like that. Like if you could just get them to where you need to be for a long rest, you've saved yourself some resources. Again, I'm gonna bypass perception real quick. And survival though, that's another wisdom check. So that allows you to like follow tracks, hunt game, like notice if there's certain monsters nearby. Avoid, it says like avoid quicksand or other natural hazards. So anything that will keep you alive, basically in the wilderness. Another thing you could use wisdom for, and this is where I say the street smarts come in. You get a gut feeling about what course of action to follow. So that would not be necessarily a specific skill check. That would just be, all right, roll wisdom, just straight wisdom.
That's that remaining monkey senses. Will Tarzan?
Okay.
It's your gut.
Yes, so it's it's following that gut instinct. So even in D&D, if you're a new DM or you're new players, that is a thing, and you can roll for it. I mean, you can pretty much roll for whatever you want, but that's a perfect example of if they're like, man, we have two options, I'm not sure what to do. Matt knows this. I don't do it as much anymore, but when we first started playing, I would roll a D20 on certain decisions because I'm like, I don't know. And if it,
do that, dude. You're just like, I'm rolling. I'm like, I didn't ask you to roll, Will, and you'd be like, well, I'm doing it. Find out what I do.
Actually, yeah, I still do. I didn't think I did it as much, but now that you say it out loud, I do. But that's not a bad thing. Because
it's like flipping a coin.
Yeah, because sometimes, especially in my case, for our actual play game, the two characters that I've been running, my main character and the sidekick, you guys both knew. Spoiler alert, I guess they were not meant to be my long-term characters. So it has been. We've talked about this off camera, obviously, but like it's been harder for me to get into character because I knew I wasn't keeping them. So I rolled a lot more because I was like, I don't know. However, the next character I have, Matt finally gave me his blessing, and I'm so excited. You laugh. You knew I would not make that character until you said it was okay. I literally waited. And now it's here. But we'll talk about that later. So, yes. Wisdom is anything, like I said, that you think might be a street smart thing. Gut instincts is the best way to, a good way to put that. That's
time to talk about the big ones.
I know. I was trying to avoid them. I don't know why. Probably because they're so intertwined.
I would like to say, with especially these pairings of skills between intelligence and wisdom, sometimes I do acknowledge that there are players that are going to choose that characters that either have one or the other, not always both. And so sometimes you might have two players, one's great in intelligence and one's great in wisdom, and you kind of want them both to pass the check. So I will always put up the option between two skills. I'd be like, hey, Will, I know you're good at intelligence, so either you can give me a nature check, if you want to, or you can give me a medicine check, that kind of thing. I do that because I was like, he might, maybe, yeah, he did have a high intelligence, but maybe he's more so of a medicine guy, and so he's got more pluses than that. And that goes with the other players too. Other players at the table will be like, okay, well, I'm not that great in nature, but yeah, medicine. And so these specific abilities, wisdom and intelligence, can be used to check the same situation, but the knowledge they get from it is going to be different. We played games where you guys have both passed the checks, but the information I give you specifically to your characters are specific to the check. Like, oh, you notice because of your survival check that the twigs on the trees are all broken. You know they've gone that way. Whereas somebody in a history check will know straight up, being like, well, you can see the smokestacks from here, from the town far away, and you know, history check, that's the town of Galal. And so you're like, they then together as players would be able to like, that's the town of galal, and then the other player would be like, they went that way.
Right.
Boom.
Exactly. So let's take a look here. That's a great way to look at it. And we do, yeah, you're right. We definitely do always, especially you, give us multiple options. But, and that's something to keep in mind. I was saying, but I didn't mean it, but I did it again. That's one of those things where, again, as a DM, you can get creative. Now, if you're obviously in like an urban area, survival might be a little tougher because you're not seeing as much wilderness. However, that doesn't mean that you can't say, oh, you see a trail of rats going to a back door, or you see ants. Yeah.
Rust, erosion.
Yeah, it can be anything like that. So always try to be, anyways, open-minded about allowing your players to shine, because like if you have a ranger is a class that's not used a lot, but it is very much a wisdom based class, and a lot of them are their survival skills are great. You always want to try to give your players a chance to shine. If they want to play that kind of a character, a scout, or anything,
work these little
yeah. So try to find ways to do that if you can, because it's if not, it kind of makes a player feel like they did all that for nothing.
right, like
and
unuseful.
Yeah,
Nobody wants to feel that way.
exactly. So let's though take a look at the how perception and investigation specifically are used. But I want to do insight first, and the reason I'm doing these are three that if you use, again, not I have to say this almost every episode, not a sponsor. D&D Beyond, once you've created your character, you'll see there's 3 skills that you get passive skills in: perception, investigation, and insight. So before I get too much into I'm going to go through insight first and then explain kind of what the passives portion of that is for. Excuse me. So for insight, insight determines whether you can determine the true intention of a creature, such as when searching out a lie or predicting someone's next move. Doing so involves gleaning clues from body language, speech habits, and changes in mannerisms. So again, I always preface this for anybody who's new. The newer DM, a lot of times you might forget to you might forget to act it out, is the way I was trying to get at. So if you're sitting here just like, so yeah, the NPC says this, or he does that, you can do that. Or you can say, well, you see this a lot with like Matt Mercer, Brendan Lee Mulligan especially. Those are the two that most people are familiar with. B-Dave, I think, does this as well. Satine. A lot of the big time DMs, they actually act it out. They don't say the NPC says this. They're just like, they act that character out. And they'll sometimes, do an eyebrow raise, or they'll, what? Who? What? Like if something gets said, they act it out as if that might be a clue to somebody. And when you watch the players, they'll say, can I roll insight to see what happened? Like, can I tell if they're doing something?
That's true. That said, though, some people aren't good at it.
No,
don't feel comfortable.
No, well, that's what I was going to say.
Saying, like, the flavor, having just that flavor of, like, you see him, like, maybe look down at the ground, and then saying it naturally, just like, and he says, don't go in there. But it's that look down at the ground thing that you added that would make them have that little...
Well, right. Well, no, and that's what I was going to... That's where I was getting to, is that a lot of times people want to do DM and stuff because they see these guys, these people, and it's like, that's a learned skill. Like, they're professionals. There's nothing wrong with... because I do this a lot. I'll say, well, yeah, he does this, he says that. I do it all the time. And sometimes giving that, as he looks at the ground, he says this. Or he folds his arms across his chest and looks you up and down. Giving those kind of descriptors can sometimes give your players hints. Now, whether or not they pass the appropriate DC or skill check, that's a whole nother conversation. But you can at least give them something. If you're not comfortable acting that out, or if you don't think you're good at acting those things out, just vocalize it. And because giving your players something is better than giving them nothing. That's something I've learned over time. Is I would rather say, oh yeah, the blacksmith says this, and they say, well, what did he mean by that? Well, we'll roll for it and go from there. So that long-windedness coming out. Passive checks. I mentioned those. So passive checks, it's a special kind of ability check where you don't use any die rolls. A check can represent the average result for a task done repeatedly, such as searching for secret doors over and over again, or can be used when the DM wants to secretly determine whether the characters succeed at something without rolling dice, such as noticing a hidden monster. So the best example I can give is if in the Lost Mines of Phandelver, which is the starter kit adventure, the very first thing you come across is a set of 4 goblins that are hiding. And as a DM, you have to roll their stealth, but it literally says you can have the players roll or use their passive. You can use either one.
I've just recently started using passives.
Yeah.
I'm going to be truthfully. I sometimes forget.
And I think that's something that I've kind of adopted early on because for me it's a pace of play thing. So where I'm like, if this is a perception roll, what's your guys' passives? And I usually have them written down so I can look at it, and I'll be like, Matt, your character sees this. You don't see anything. You know what?
It's kind of like if you know the passives for wisdoms and intelligence rolls and stuff. Well, mostly wisdom. Then you don't need to necessarily be like, all right, and like you don't need to necessarily create like this moment of tension of like, okay, now roll for what you see. You can just tell them something creepy they see, and then whether if they want to investigate it further with another check, that's an actual full-on check.
Exactly. And so the big thing is perception is I want to read the actual definition here. It lets you spot, hear, or otherwise detect the presence of something. It measures your general awareness of your surroundings and the keenness of your senses. That's the Tarzan Matt was talking about. So, for example, you might try to hear a conversation through a closed door, eavesdrop. So it's those kinds of things. It's not something that you're necessarily going. You might see, but it's more like, hey, some guy was running down the street. Did I get a good look at him?
Yeah.
And
there's a full-on ripped grown man that
yeah,
ripped a loincloth, hated by monkeys.
Yeah, or you could roll a 1 and it's like you might have seen a shadow, or you get that nat 20 and it's like, yeah, you saw every fiber of hair and and everything like that. So the perceptions are things that are really we use them at least for like hearing or like I like the general presence kind of thing. Like what kind of like does that person pass the vibe check? And and it's like something weird about this guy. Not necessarily that they're lying to you, which would be an insight check, but there's just something about them. Like I'm trying to see, do I notice they're standing a certain way, or do I smell a certain thing? Those things that are more like, oh, that reminds me of something. Whereas investigation is you're actively looking for something. So like the reason they mention, I think it was under passive perception, it's the like looking for a secret, searching for a secret door. Searching is an active thing. That's investigation. But perception, I think that one as a passive is more. Do you like it's, do you smell something, or do you notice out of the corner of your eye maybe somebody's watching you? Did you get a good look at them? It's those things that might be there, whereas investigation is like, no, those things are there. You're just trying to find it.
Yeah.
So
that's a big difference though, because like when you try to roll for investigation and the DM tells you you don't find anything, yeah, that's when it can be frustrating when you keep hearing that.
Yeah, and I know you're really good about this. Is even if you get like a really low roll, you'll be like, oh, you might find like a napkin on the floor, and it looks like there might have been some writing on it, but the writing is smudged. Okay, look, man, it's not helpful, but I found something.
Yeah.
Like, and I can be like, who's sitting at this table? Well, then, but I mean, at least it leads the story on. Yeah.
That's kind of like my biggest thing between like insight and insight movement. But like investigation is like when you investigate something, it will how I phrase it, it will lead into what you do next.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So those two, they often get confused though. A lot of times people will call for perception when it should have been insight and vice versa. So just remember, if it's something that you are actively looking for, that's investigation. Perception is, oh, you notice that like in this tavern there's a lot of elves, but there's a gnome just sitting in the corner. Like that's a perception thing. You're not looking for that. It's something you just kind of notice, and it might not mean anything to you, but if you rolled for perception, I might mention that. Like you kind of notice that it's a little out of place because there's a lot of elves and there's just a random gnome sitting in a corner, or a dwarf, or whatever. Just as an example. So that's one of those things where, like I said, you might notice it. It might be something. It might be nothing, but you weren't looking for that. You just happen to see it. So, I mean, I'm trying to simplify this because it is something that gets mixed up quite a bit. But again, if you're ever curious, if you're using digital resources, obviously, like I always say, D&D Beyond. Yeah, there's so many D&D Beyond. I think Roll20 even has some of the stuff in there. Free compendium. The basic rules from the Wizards website goes over this, and those are free. So there's all kinds of resources. If you're not sure, download the PDF, print it off, highlight, sticky tabs, whatever you got to do. Because as long as it doesn't bring play to a screeching halt, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey guys, give me just a second. Let me look it up. Okay, cool. Go. Otherwise, I think we've said this before, like make your best judgment call and then maybe afterwards discuss it. Have that open dialogue of, hey, I'm not sure. I don't want to take this. This is taking a little longer than I thought. We'll do it this way, and then we'll clarify afterwards.
Right. We kind of do that. We do that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Especially if I say do this check, and then you and Matt are always just like, is that the right check you want me, Matt?
Yeah.
What check? What should I mean?
Yeah, but we also have a lot of trust in each other.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like usually me and Matt are on the same page. Like, well, it should be this. And if both of us are on the same page, you're like, yeah, fine, then do that. And if we're different, you're just like, then do the one I said because you guys can't agree, so we'll figure it out later. So it's like best 2 out of 3. But that's a good way to do that. If everybody's in agreement on, no, this is what it should be. Again, as a DM, yes, you're kind of running this game, but you're playing it with your players. I see this a lot on, especially like Crit Crab's YouTube page. Check him out because I love his content. It's a good what not to do as a DM. But you see that a lot where the DM fights the players, and I really look at it more like you're just narrating their story. You're playing with them, not against them. So even if you're like, ooh, this is off the rails and I don't like this, I'm that guy. Matt will tell you, I hate when they do stuff I'm not ready for. I'm like, I panic and I freak. But go with it. This is their story. And a lot of times your players will come up with something better than you ever could. Because it's their imagination. It's what they want to play. And so that's super important. But communication is key. I will say that every episode until this channel shuts down. Communication. If like I said, if it's going to bring your game to a screeching halt, put a pin in it. Discuss it afterwards. Because there's no reason in ruining everybody's fun. Because you're stuck on a rule or the way a spell works, things like that. You can always just make a one-time exception, come back to it, and do it the right way next time. So that's really all I had this week, man. I try to, like I said, I wanted to keep these two pretty simple. They are the two skills, like I said, especially investigation, perception, insight. They're the ones you'll use the most for for a lot of games. But sometimes simpler is better. So, and anything you have to add, good sir?
No.
Alrighty, guys. Well, keep an eye out. We've done a couple of live episodes, mostly doing book reviews for that. So, third-party books. I'm sure at some point we'll do maybe some adventure modules or things like that. New stuff's coming out all the time. Stay tuned, though. We're probably, we're going to do a lot of those. Yes, I actually really like.
So many.
I was going to say you have them, and we have them digitally now as well. Thank you, Matt H. For
That'd
sure.
be really cool. There's an idea, Will, because then we can do adventure model reviews of other games.
We can. So
Besides.
yes, and so keep a lookout. We're doing some more live stuff because a lot of times it's easier. Even if one of us just wants to do an episode, we can. We don't have to wait for the others. So keep an eye out on that, everybody. But as always, thank you so much. We appreciate you watching, listening, and we will see you guys next week. Have a great weekend and happy gaming.